wanted to show you Zach's new haircut. He went to the groomer and they put these cute little things on him. These are cute. Say hi, Zach. Say hi. For the quadratic formula, it is something that will always work when a function is in standard form, but it's kind of tedious, or it can be tedious. So you always want to check to see if you can factor first. If you can't factor, if you can complete the square possibly, and then if it's set up as square root, of course you would do that, but factoring and completing the square are the other ones that would be in standard form. What I mean by that is this form. Okay, so the quadratic formula is something you do want to know. You will need it in every class after this one. It's very, very popular. So of course there's a song. I learned this song in the 10th grade and I have memorized it ever since. So it goes to row, row, row your boat, and basically the formula is the words. So it's x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you can practice it and it'll help you remember it. Okay, so we want to use that for our vocabulary on page 62. Let's see if we can do it now that we learned the song. It's x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it's just where a, b, and c come from the standard form. Now the discriminant is this middle piece in here. So it's this is what a discriminant is. And the discriminant just tells you a little bit about that graph before you graph it. It tells you how many roots it's going to have. Okay, so that's another part of this section. All right, so we're going to do a couple on page 61 as a just as practice. So here we're going to have where this is my A, my B, and my C. So let's write that out so when we get ready to use them, we know what they are. A is 1, B is -4, and C is 3. So when I start working the formula, it starts x equals negative b. So negative of -4 is basically what that means. After a while, you'll stop doing that and you'll just write it as positive 4. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, which would be 2 times 1. So that's the hard part. After that, it's just simplifying. So negative of -4 would be positive 4, plus or minus the square root of -4 squared is 16, minus 4 times 3 would be 12. Generally in here is where we run into errors, so you need to get enough practice that we're fixing those errors. Okay, so this would be 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 12 is 4 over 2. And so when you can simplify, we want to simplify. In this case, the square root of 4 is 2. So we're going to simplify this as, actually I'm going to come down here, 4 plus or minus 2 over 2. Okay, just because the square root of 4 is 2. Now that's going to give me two answers. That's going to give me 4 plus 2 over 2 and 4 minus 2 over 2, hence the positive and negative. So 4 plus 2 and 4 minus 2 is what that means. So my two answers are going to be 6 over 2, which is 3, and 2 over 2, which is 1. Now when that happens, what that means is that original equation could have actually been factored. So if it can be factored, you'll get whole numbers like this. Okay, so that's one situation that you would see. Alright, so now let's do this one over here, B. So A is 1, B is -2, and C is 2. So I'll have x equals negative b. So I'm going to, since b is -2, I think you understand now that negative of -2 would be positive 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which would be 4, because it's -2 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a, so that would be like 2 times 1. So this would be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 8 over 2. So 2 plus or minus the square root of -4 this time over 2. So where I got that from was 4 times 1 times 2 gave me 8, and then 4 minus 8 is -4. I'm just using order of operations. All right, so this would be 2 plus or minus. Now we just learned about imaginary numbers, and that's what happens here. We're going to have 2I over 2. All right, and when you get this, what I call this little heart right here, call it the GIF, then if you have a reduction between those three numbers, then you can reduce. So since 2 over 2 is 1, and 2 over 2 is 1, that would be my final answer. Okay, I'm going to do these last two, excuse me, really quickly, just because I don't want to make this video too long. All right, so it'll be x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Notice how c is negative this time, over 2 times a, which would be 2. So it'll be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. Now careful here, you're looking at this as negative 4 times 1 times negative 3, which is positive 12 over 2. So that gives me negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. Again, the square root of 16 is 4. So I have negative 2 plus or minus 4 over 2. That gives me two answers. Those answers will be negative 2 plus 4 over 2 and negative 2 minus 4 over 2. Therefore, my two answers are, let's see, 2 over 2, which is 1, and negative 6 over 2, which is negative 3. Again, that means that in the beginning, this thing could have been factored. Okay, but that wasn't my instruction, so I didn't do it. All right, and the last one. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, again, plugging it in is the hardest part of this. Now it's just order of operations. So inside we have 16 minus 4 times 1, which would be 16. Over 2. So in this case, what happens is we get square root of 0, which is just 0. So I'm going to have negative 4 plus or minus 0 over 2, which of course is just negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2. So what that means is that I have a 0. I'm sorry, I just have one answer, which is negative 2. Okay, so when we talk about the discriminant, I'm going to come back and talk about what happens here when you get 0, how I have one solution. When I get a number larger than 1 in the discriminant, I'm sorry, larger than 0, meaning it's positive, then I have two solutions. And when I have one that is less than 0, meaning it's negative, I have imaginary solutions. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the discriminants we were just talking about. The discriminants is the b squared minus 4ac part, the part that's underneath the square root. So there's three cases that can happen. If you want to know ahead of time how many solutions we have, if that b squared minus 4ac is larger than 0, meaning it's positive, just like in the examples we saw, then you're going to have two solutions. If it's equal to 0, then you're only going to have one solution. And if it is less than 0, meaning it's negative, you'll have no x-intercepts or two imaginary solutions. Okay, so let's go back and revisit the page we were just working on, but with E and F. And let's just do the discriminants first. Okay, so in that case, we're going to take b squared minus 4ac and see if we can figure out what kind of function we're going to have here. So that'll be negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. This will be 36 minus 40. And so what happens is we get negative 4, which is less than 0. So what that tells us is that we're going to have two imaginary solutions in that case. And we'll actually solve it out so we can see what those are. And then in this one, the discriminant is b squared would be 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. So we have 16, oh, it looks like the same thing happens, minus 24, which would be negative 8. Again, that's less than 0, so we should have, again, two imaginary solutions. All right, so let's go back and actually work those the quadratic formula for those. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So this would be 6 plus or minus the square root of 36, we already kind of worked this part, minus 40 over 2. So I have 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4, we said, over 2. So it makes sense that we're going to have two imaginary solutions. The answers will be 6 plus or minus, this is 2i over 2. Now I do see that little heart here with my whole numbers. So in that case, I'm going to reduce 6 over 2 is 3, 2 over 2 is 1. So this would be my two imaginary solutions. All right, let's work the quadratic formula for this one too. So we'll have x equals negative b is 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a would be 2. Now notice all the ones that I've used have had a equal to 1, and so that's why this bottom number is always 2. Like this is always a 1 and that's always 2. That won't happen in every case. It just happens to be the ones that the workbook chose. And you just go with the flow of the problem. Okay, so we have negative 4 plus or minus square root of 16 minus 24, like we said, over 2. So this would be negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 over 2. Okay, now we're going to think about simplifying. So we're going to simplify the square root of negative 8. Now, you have already learned this, but we're basically going to think of this as square root of negative 1 times square root of 4 times square root of 2, where square root of 4 and square root of negative 1 can be simplified. So we now it will be 2i square root of 2 all over 2. And then of course again we have that little heart there. Alright, and so now negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Okay, so this is the solution we're looking at. And you can't get that by doing square root method, or you could do completing the square with that one, but it could not be factored either. So you're starting to realize which ones you can do these for. Okay, on this next one, what I want to do, what you see in front of you is the answers. But I really want you to take the time and practice this. So you're going to work 1 through 6 on page 64, and then when you're ready, the answers are here for you to check yourself. Okay, good luck.